Everyone, good morning to everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here in this session. It's a very interesting session, I hope, because we are talking about a very important topic, which is the energy security concerns in this particular period, which is the period of transition, of energy transition toward a complete of the program of decarbonization. So it's very important to give the floor to some very important person in relation to different topics of this session title. We are talking about energy security. What is this energy security in terms of new perspectives of decarbonization? We know that we need a very uninterrupted availability of energy, but it's very important to consider right now the intervention of electrification by one side and renewable by the other side, which means some very important intervention on the grid in terms of security of energy. But it's also interesting to understand how to include this concept into the frame of decarbonization, in particular in the SDGs number 7, the so-called clean energy for all, which is another phase of the same matter. Something happened in the last weeks and months, very important. First of all, the European Commission decision for 55 new target for 2030. We will talk about this. And also the COP26 with light and shadows. But this is an important step forward, the decarbonization process. So I stop here my brief intervention, a presentation of the session. I propose a list of interventions starting from Silvia Pariente-David. She is the consultant on energy and climate change and senior advisor of the Center for Mediterranean Integration for World Bank in France. Her intervention is an intervention very important in order to have a general overview of the situation. So I give the floor to her, thanking again for her participation. Thank you, Silvia.
Thank you. And if you can hear me well, I will now try to share my screen before I start. I have a problem here because it won't move.
It's okay. It's okay. It was okay. It was okay. Okay, we may see your presentation now.
Yeah, but it's not at the beginning. Here we are. Okay, thank you. It was not wanting to move. So today I would like our person, Mr. De Santoli, Professor De Santoli. I'm here to talk to you about energy security, decarbonization, and regional energy market integration. Focusing a little bit, of course, on the Mediterranean, because that's one of my pet subjects. So I'd like to start by discussing what's new, because I think I was here at the same conference last year talking about a similar topic. And you may think it's hearing the same thing again and again and be boring, but here I want to show you what happened since we already talked about that last week. COVID first. Last year we talked already about COVID, and we're kind of hoping that we were reaching the end. So COVID, we keep thinking it's going to end, and it never ends. I think now we have learned that we're going to have to learn to live with it rather than wait for the end. But so it's come with a very strong recovery of the economies, of course, starting from a very low level. But we had a beneficial effect, if I can call it like that, of a very drastic reduction of CO2 emission in 2020. If you remember, there was this graph, I think I put it in annex when you get the slides, from the IEA, showing it was the largest ever annual reduction in CO2 emissions. But now we are getting the data for 2021, and they're picking up, because when that happened, we thought, oh, well, if we have a way to prevent them from rebounding, that would be great. And everybody was hoping with the strong policy for climate that we will avoid a rebound, but we failed. So they're picking up very rapidly to levels before the pandemic, and the pandemic is not over yet. As you all know, since last summer, we have been experiencing very dramatic energy price spikes, because it's been all over the news, and not just the specialized news now, the daily news, because the consumers are really worried about those price increases. Now, what's interesting with the price spike, I could go on for a long time, the full time I have, but that's not the topic, explaining to you what created it. And there are different opinions on that. But what's interesting is to see what conclusion people are drawing from it, because they're completely different. Some people say, wow, that's great, means renewables are even more competitive. And we're already told that they are competitive with fossil fuels. So now we're sure to go for renewables and for decarbonization. So that should be very good for the quest for carbon neutrality. But then others say, oh, well, you have to do something to wipe out the price spikes of fossil fuels, because we desperately need those fossil fuels, and we need to make sure we can have them without paying too much. And in my view, you know, how can an industry that knows that they have no future, because everybody tells them that after 2050 we no longer need oil and gas, but we desperately need them now. So what can they do? They know they have no future. You know very well that if you want oil and gas, you need to continue exploring. It takes a long time to develop a new field. It takes a long time to find new ones. So I think we're not going to be able to avoid until 2050 periods of volatility, price spikes, and other, especially. Probably there was a lot of gaming that explained part of the price spike that we saw recently. And the more we have a situation like that, where oil and gas production is being phased out, but suddenly needed, there will be some people using this situation to use their market power and push the price up. So that's another point. Thirdly, we have the Fit for 55 package that was issued last July. The first train, there is another set of directives and regulations, which is due today. Actually, it was due yesterday, but I've seen that it was supposed to come out today. And what their objective is to implement the EU Green Deal. It's even a bigger set of directives and regulations. I think we are 10,000 pages than the clean energy package was. And finally, we had the COP26 in Glasgow. Some people say nothing happened, but a little bit there was more and more commitment. I'm going to show you a graph in a minute to carbon neutrality. Some vague agreement to stop financing of coal because it was twisted at the last minute, but some kind of agreement. And finally, the decision to a realization that methane matters, not just CO2, because methane is a more potent global greenhouse gas emission, greenhouse gas, so it should be dealt with such as CO2. All of those commitments are not enough to reach the Paris Agreement objective of limiting temperature increases to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So that's the chart I was talking to you about in a few minutes. That's the, I lost the sources, the Delors Institute. What it shows that there's an acceleration of commitment to carbon neutrality after Europe took the lead. And then especially going on the way to Glasgow, I think the chart was stopped in October and there were more commitments since then. And now we have like 80% of world GDP covered by carbon neutrality commitment, but not necessarily put into law yet. Not all the countries have created laws for carbon neutrality. If I come back to Europe now, which is the topic of our discussion today, the EU Green Deal was initially, it was before the just before the COVID, published to address the path to carbon neutrality. Since then, it has become a little bit of a solution to everything. The jack of all trades. It has to provide carbon neutrality, economic growth, innovation, social justice, everything. You know, it's some. And the Fit for 55 package is the implementation instrument, especially towards 2030. So how to reach the interim target of 55% by 2030, which was turned into law in July, last July. What's important now, especially as regards energy security and regional market integration, that the EU Green Deal is not limited to energy, it goes beyond energy. There was a first communication from the Commission for an Industrial Strategy. And as part of that, there is hydrogen, recognizing hydrogen is key to decarbonization and that Europe wants to be a leader, and the creation of the Hydrogen Alliance. And the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, was initially mentioned in the industrial strategy to preserve the EU's industrial competitiveness and prevent carbon leakages. And this is absolutely critical as regard trade of energy and will affect the regional integration and to some extent energy security if you want, because it will raise the cost of some imports. And then, as I said, the EU Green Deal goes beyond Europe. In particular, if I focus on the Mediterranean, there is a grid agenda for the Western Balkans, a new agenda for the Mediterranean, and a new strategy in preparation. So this being said, what does it all mean for energy security? The problem is I'm not sure we have an agreement on what energy security is. And I'm not sure I want to give a definition, because that's what is called a polysem. I discovered this wonderful word that says that everybody talks about energy security, but they all mean something different. If we go back to the origin of the AIEE, because the AIEE was created for that, if I remind you, to create strategical reserves and to implement energy security after the first Arab oil embargo. So they defined it as the uninterrupted availability of energy sources, and they added affordable price. So I would say with the recent price spikes, we may have had a problem because some people would say it was not affordable. Now, with the development of renewables, which are variable and intermittent, the energy security has come to include the power system reliability and grid stability, because when you have the electricity operators, they like things to be smooth. They just hate sudden change, because then we lose the grid, and then we don't want to do a black start. That's the worst. I guess the Italians are familiar with that. I remember in Rome, when was it again? When the 24 hours with no electricity was quite serious. So security is different things to different people. The indicators typically include like something like self-sufficiency, degree of import dependency. It also depends on how many suppliers, diversifying the energy mix, that kind of thing. So increasingly, the concept moved from self-sufficiency to also relying on your neighbors and cooperation to ensure your supply is available. And what I mean here is that it's not just being self-sufficient. And the question then is, are energy security and decarbonization compatible or not? And the only way to reach carbon neutrality is to have a massive scale up of renewable energy. And traditionally, we used to think that renewables was produced locally for local consumption. So everybody said, great, if we do renewables, we become self-sufficient. Is self-sufficiency to be it's called the synonymous to energy security? It doesn't necessarily mean being in autarky, because you're dependent on a resource that may not be available at that time. So of course it's local, you stop importing. Some of the indicators of energy security are good, but then you rely on a resource which is not reliable. The wind may stop blowing. Sun, usually you know when it is available, but you can always have clouds. And with renewables, as I said, they are not always available when you need them, and they are intermittent. So that's a threat to system reliability and energy security. To cope with a high level of renewable penetration, power system need flexibility, which is the ability to cope with a sudden change in supply or demand at any point of time, because you don't store electricity. And there are several ways of doing it. Of course, the traditional power plants, which are dispatchable, demand side response, storage, battery storage, but also pump storage, but also interconnection with neighbors, regional energy market integration that provides flexibility. And because you can share with your neighbors the availability when you need, and it's always easier to balance in real time a large energy system, electricity system, than a small one. The law of large number, it's much easier because you always have sun and wind someplace. So that's a way of doing it without hurting the objective of security and affordability. And as I said, the regional energy market integration helps provide the flexibility. So it helps the renewable energy scale up. And it also helps normally in energy security. That's why we had the power pools, because you can share, you can call on your neighbors for reserve when you need it. It also provides a smoothing of the low duration curve when you aggregate demands with different shapes. And clearly, it's a principle of optimization. You optimize your power system over a larger area, so you have a lower cost of supply. But that creates more, I don't know if you call it trade, but exchanges. They may not be trade in one direction, but it's back and forth of exchanges of electricity when you need it. That's probably the best way to ensure you have decarbonization and the most reliable way. And some people say if you depend more on neighbors, you have a lower energy security. I don't know. Anyway, if I now come to the Mediterranean, this is probably a very interesting case where it's the most valuable to do regional energy market integration, because as you can see on the map, you have an area where you have a lot of sun, but not just sun, you have also wind. Anyway, a lot of energy which is without carbon, plenty, a lot more than what those countries in the Southern Shore need. And they're very close to an area of the world, as we saw earlier, that wants a lot of energy with no carbon. And they were the first one to go for carbon neutrality. So if they manage to work together, that should be good for everybody. Plus, by doing this regional integration, you increase power system flexibility. By the way, a key aspect of the Green Deal was to increase cross-border trade, regional cooperation, share clean energy sources, interconnect system, so you reach carbon neutrality at least cost. Therefore, it should increase energy security both for Europe and the countries of the South. And in addition, it provides some social and economic benefits for the countries of the south of the Mediterranean, because it will create new activities for them, jobs and everything. Now, just to conclude, because I think I'm reaching my time, it's a very complex slide. You don't have to read everything here. Because whenever I show, because that's one of my favorite subject, integration in Mediterranean, people ask me, how do we do it? So first you need hardware. Everybody say, oh, you don't have enough interconnectors. And that's not necessarily true, because you have a lot of them which are not used. So the map on the top is the map of the electricity system in the Mediterranean. You can see it's completely empty in the middle, but you have interconnection on the right and the left through the Gibraltar west, because Morocco is connected and synchronized with Spain, with the Iberic Peninsula. On the right, you have Turkey synchronized with Europe. You have a few issues in a couple of areas, like between Libya and Tunisia, and also countries at war on the east of Mediterranean. And there are many projects to connect in the middle. Most of them are stalled, like the Tunisia-Italy is moving very slowly. Now, if we look at the gas transport infrastructure, which is the map below, this, on the contrary, it's connected more in the middle. That's better. And it's already underutilized, and it's going, principle, if Europe moves to carbon neutrality, should be used less and less. So it could be used to transport hydrogen or a blend. You have the pipeline delivering natural gas from Algeria to Spain through Morocco. Algeria, as you all know, recently announced that they're going to stop using that pipeline. The Spanish and the Moroccans were completely panicked. But if it's empty, it means it can be used to export green hydrogen, for instance, by Morocco, which is one of the places mentioned everywhere to produce green hydrogen at a very competitive cost. Plus, they have a local demand with the phosphate industry. As a result, by the way, they are going to switch their export to Spain from Algeria to Medgaz. Medgaz used to be empty, so maybe it would be full now, I don't know. The pipeline that goes from Algeria to Italy through Tunisia is also far from being full, and most of the LNG terminals, especially in Spain, have low utilization rate. However, so what I mean here is that the infrastructure is needed but exists. However, it's not sufficient. You need what I call the software, because you need operating system to talk to each other. You need market design to be compatible. And you need to think globally on electricity, especially if you use hydrogen as a solution for storage, the power to X. So you need to think of your energy system more globally rather than electricity on one side and gas on the other side, is what is called by the European sector integration and sector coupling, when you couple with end-use sectors. In summary, you need to think whole energy system, not piecemeal. And you need to think whole, not just national. You need to think with the others, because we are moving to increasing interdependencies in the energy system. This will be the only solution to the decarbonization at a low cost. I like to compare that to a symphony. To have a good symphony is not sufficient. To have good instruments and good musicians, you need good musical scores that they share, and especially a good conductor. And we may be missing the conductor in the Mediterranean. And I will stop on this, answer the question later or now, I don't know, up to the chair to decide.
Thank you very much, Silvia. Thank you very much for your very interesting comments about this general overview. I don't know if there are already questions from the floor, but I don't think, because the chat line is empty again. Just I would like to ask you a very brief comment about the decision of in COP26. I mean, a not a decision to postpone again funding for the developed country from the industrialized country. They talk about 100,000 millions of dollars each year, and since 10 years, and nobody happened. Do you think that probably the next future could be exactly what they need in order to integrate in Mediterranean, for example, Africa countries with European countries, using this kind of money?
Okay, this is a long question. I could have another presentation, and I think I'm going to be on purpose a bit controversial in the way I answer that. That being put on the table times and times again by developing countries as an excuse, and that's why you look at their NDC and the conditional conversos, the unconditional they put on all that. In my view, it's a false problem. It's no longer a problem, okay? And I think we should stop discussing that in all the meetings. It's a negotiating position more than a real problem, okay? But it was put on the table in Paris or before the COP 2021. And so first, we don't know how to count it. So nobody knows how to count that. So you keep having studies and you give me each of these studies and I will demolish it, okay? Number one. So when you don't know how to measure something, let's try to use common sense. Okay, let's try to be just simple. Renewable energy, everybody says, and I think it's true, are not cheaper than fossil fuels. Mm-hmm. So why should you give another country money so they use something cheaper than what they would be using otherwise? Okay. Secondly, honestly, if you think as an economist a little bit, it's always the same problem when you have a capital stock is the age of the capital stock. Mm-hmm. So if you have a country with a fast growing energy demand, it's easier to move to decarbonization than an old country that has plenty of capacity that is there and that you have to retire. So if you build more power plants, then it's easier to have low carbon power plants than if you don't build power plants. So in the end, it's easier to move to low carbon in a fast growing country like either an emerging economy or okay. So it's non-problem. I think now it doesn't mean they don't need help. They need technical assistance. They need help doing that. And I think developed countries should spend the money on helping do it where it's easy, so that will save the world and they will spend less money than doing it at home. But it's not necessarily just transferring money for decarbonization. And by the way, the EU has plenty of funds to help developing countries become without carbon. But I think the problem is not looked at correctly, in my view, on the discussion.
Thank you very much again. Thank you very much for everything. Now I move on to Alicia Mignone. Okay. Thank you very much, Alicia, to be here. Your intervention is related to the role of critical raw materials. So it's very important, and I give the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to share. Okay, it's okay. Okay, my presentation is related to the role of critical raw materials for strategic technologies and sectors. And the contents is what and how many are the critical raw materials. And I'm going to share with you some elements from the EU foresight study that has been done in the 2020, and also the more recent work of the AIEE that has been mentioned by Silvia on the role of critical minerals, they call it minerals, in clean energy transition, and some recommendations. What is the context? An energy system powered by clean energy technologies needs significantly more raw materials. And here are an example of the lithium. I don't know why it's changing. Okay. Lithium, nickel, cobalt, manganese, and graphite for batteries. Rare earth elements for wind turbines and electric vehicles. Copper, silicon, and silver for solar photovoltaics. Copper and aluminum for electricity networks. And the recent price rises for these already mentioned materials struggle to keep pace with the climate ambitions, because all these elements are part of the renewable energy deployment. The energy transition calls for an evolving approach to energy security, and policymakers must act to reduce the price volatility of supply of these materials. So I want to show you what has been presented under Finance and Economics on the April edition of The Economist. And it's very important. Governments have identified commodities essential to economic and military security. Obtaining them is another matter. This is important. Why is important? Because The Economist is a publication that reached a great audience, and it has been discussing this item times and times. So now, what and how many are the critical raw materials for the European Union? There is a definition that has been approved by the EU, that critical raw materials are essential prerequisites for the development of strategic sectors such as renewable energy, electric mobility, because we are speaking of electric cars, defense and aerospace, and digital technologies. What are the parameters that determine the criticality of the material for the EU? Economic importance and supply risk. These assessments of the EU, I think it's the fourth one, covers a large number of materials, 83. And from these are 63 individual materials and 3 groups of what they call heavy rare earth elements, and 5 platinum group metals. This is important because, as I will show in the next slide, what is the distribution, the geographic distribution of these materials? It continues, jump. Okay. This is the geographic distribution. As you can see, the largest share of global supply of critical raw materials, this comes from the study of the EU study, are from Russia. Also, you can see the importance of Democratic Republic of Congo, Brazil, Chile for lithium, Australia, and also Turkey. So here is the geographic distribution. The next slide that I'm going to show you is that is a slide that I have taken from the IEA, is the compared extraction and processing. And it can be seen in the case of fossil fuels here, you see the United States and oil. This is Saudi Arabia. And this is, I don't know what happens with this. I have a problem here with, it continues, perhaps I can use this. This is Saudi Arabia, and this is Russia. Really, it's the problem with my computer. Natural gas You can see also the United States, because with they have with new development of the rock extraction, the USA has been one of the first producers of natural gas. You see Russia and Iran. And look, considering the extraction, you can see Chile for copper, that's very important, nickel, Indonesia, cobalt, the Democratic Republic of Congo, rare earths, China. And this is one, I think, one of the geopolitical problems with the US, because if you go to the processing, look at the role of China in the processing of copper, nickel, cobalt, lithium, and the rare earths. This is the predominance of China in this critical raw material. And this is not new, because they have been in the Democratic Republic of Congo for years, using the natural resources of this country. And now here, this is a graph made by this study of the European Commission. What is they have analyzed the technologies, and you have seen the symbols here, 9 technologies: batteries, fuel cells, wind, traction motors, photovoltaics, robotics, drones, 3D printing, and ICT. And you can see that there is a competing role of the technologies for the same materials. Here, supply risk, there's the sorted larger to smallest, light rare earths and high rare earths. And you can see how all these very high in supply risk are essential for the renewable energy. Also, very high and high are concentrated in the sector, renewable sector, also on the e-mobility. That is a strong move on electric cars. And also in others, moderate are competing also in the same area. There are strontium, cobalt, and platinum metals, natural graphite. This has a problem for the future, because if we want to push the all these technologies for reaching the climate ambition, we need to be sure that these materials come to the market. And for the EU, this study identifies in this picture the technologies, raw materials, processed materials, components, and assemblies. And we see from this very low, moderate, high, and very high, that the percentage of these materials is really high, because you see in the graph, high is the orange, and very high is in this in the assemblies. So,
Alicia, sorry, Alicia, may you conclude, please?
Okay, so I conclude by showing this picture that comes from the analysis that has done by the IEA. This is 2020. This is a sustainable development scenario, and this is a net zero by 2050 scenario made by the IEA. And you see the importance that has those materials for the electricity networks here, electric vehicles and battery storage, and in minor importance for wind and solar PV. And this is the growth that is expected in using the one for 2020, and you see lithium. What is the importance for lithium? That is essential for the batteries and all these technologies. And so let me see, the last is the 6 recommendations for a new comprehensive approach to mineral security. And what is I have outlined it in red, diversified sources of new supply, promote technology innovation in not points along the chain, scale up recycling. This is a very important item because there are possibilities of recovering materials. Another element important is the resilience of the supply chain and market transparency, the environmental, social, and governance standard, and the international collaboration between producers and consumers. I have made some backup slides on these recommendations for the EU that I am going to send to you, Professor De Santoli, so you can show. And here I have included the 2 main sources for this presentation. The IEA, the role of critical minerals, they call minerals in clean energy transitions, and these critical raw materials for strategic technologies and sectors in the EU. So thanks for your attention, and sorry for taking more time.
Thank you very much, Alicia. Thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. Alicia Mignone is the Senior Energy Advisor of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. And so her experience is very important in this particular field of matter. Thank you very much, Alicia. Now I think that no question are from the floor, so I can move quickly to Marco Falcone. Marco Falcone is the Government Relation Issues Manager of Esso, which is a very important company in Italy. And he would talk about the transport sectors with particular reference of the emerging technology. Please, Marco, thank you very much. The floor to you.
Many thanks, Professor De Santoli. I'll try to share the screen, if I'm able. I hope you can see it.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so I normally try to start my presentation with this slide because it gives a clear picture of what is the real challenge that we have in front of us in next days and years. It's a dual challenge. There is no more to say about this because it's very clear already in the picture. On one side, we have a technological world which is requiring to grow and to upgrade its social standards, a lot of energy. On the other side, we have to protect the environment and to preserve the environment. So this is the real challenge that we have in front of us. Both the two activities are really difficult to be implemented. So let's go into some explanation in more details about what is the role of energy. I think that everybody knows, but this picture is giving to you a clear, picture of the real importance of the energy in relation with the development of the world. You can see on the axis of the y-axis, we have the Human Development Index. It's an index which has been developed by the United Nations and gives a measure of the development of a certain population. It's based on many factors, not only the pure or the mere GDPs, so the real economic production, but also it's including other factors like education, culture, social development, social security, etc. So it's giving a real picture of the development of a certain country. You can see there are various levels: low, medium, high, very high with different colors. And on the x-axis, you can see the energy demand per capita of the various countries which are represented in this picture with the circles. By the way, the diameter, the size of the circle is proportional to the population. You can immediately see that all these circles with different colors are interpolated by, we can say, by a line. So there is a kind of proportional relation between the demand per capita of energy and the Human Development Index. It's a really a linear correlation. And in the red area, so in the corner, in the low corner, you can see all the countries that we know as countries which are trying to develop. So they are countries under development, for instance, Nigeria, Yemen, etc. The gray circles are the countries which have a medium already, they reached already a medium Human Development Index, and the most important countries in this area is India. You can immediately note that China, for instance, which was very close to India a few years ago, now has progressed, it's progressing towards, it's already in a high range, and it's progressing probably to reach the other countries in the very high corner, where we can find the United States and the other developed countries, including most of the European countries. For instance, Spain is representing the European country, which is very close to us. So that's just to say that what we're to expect is that all the countries which are in the low area, so in the red color, will very likely, and we have to hope that they will progress towards the high corner, trying to reach the others. And this will cause for sure an increase of demand per capita. We know all these things, but this chart, I like it because it's showing very well the concept. This is just an introduction to say something more in detail about the transportation sector, which is the sector that I will try to treat in this conversation. This is the energy demand, global energy demand of the transportation sector by different areas of utilization. On the left chart, you can see there are the light duties, so passengers car, and light commercial vehicles. Then you have the heavy duty, marine, aviation, and rail. The first thing that we can notice in this chart is that the only sector which has already reached the plateau around 2020, so in these last years, is the light duty sector. This sector has reached a plateau in energy consumption, and it will start to decrease towards 2040. All the other sectors are expected to increase their demand. And on the right side, you can see also the split between developed countries represented by OECD, so the countries belonging to this organization, and countries under development, so non-OECDs. And there is a big difference, as you can see, which is very visible in the light-duty sectors, where the developed countries will have a decrease in the demand, which is globally shown also on the graph on the left, which is more than the increase which is expected by the non-developed countries. And you can see in the other bars that the most of the demand is concentrated in developing countries. So that's important to know, because we in Europe are implementing a lot of initiatives to decrease the consumption, and the results is clear. We had a good result also together with other developed countries, but there is much to do also in the rest of the world. Okay. If we go, the slide before was about energy consumption, energy demand. But as we know, associated with the energy demand, there are in this period, in these days, there are emissions. And this chart is giving to you an idea of the different importance that each sector has in the emission scenario. So the road transport is representing 75% of the total emissions of the transport sector globally. The total emission can be estimated in about 7.7 gigatons of CO2 equivalent per year. So 70% represented by the road transport. Aviation is counting for 11, marine for 11. This is also interesting to note, because the road transport is probably the most difficult sector to be decarbonized, due to the fact that it's spread in million and million of point of emissions, as we well know. And so in this area, the technology will play a very important role. There are many initiatives at European and global level to try to reduce emissions in the transport sectors. We can mention, of course, the EU Green Deal, but there are also initiatives in the marine with IMO, aviation, and some. There are initiatives in all the sectors. If we go to make a zoom, I would say, on Europe, the CO2 emission in the transport sector in Europe are the only one increasing in the last 30 years about. As you can see, Europe has obtained very good results in all the sectors. Energy supply, industry, buildings, and agriculture have all obtained important decrease in emissions. The only one increasing by 18% is the transport. This is what I was saying before, probably due to the fact that this sector is very difficult to be let's say, in some way regulated and implemented from also technological point of view. What is the real issue that we have from a technological point of view in this moment in the transport sector? I would say that one of the most important, maybe is the key one, is the fact that the energy density, the volumetric energy density of the various alternatives, the various fuel or the various energy sources that we have on the table today, is ranging very much from at the top with diesel to an extreme on the other side of the graph, much lower than in proportion of the top one, which is represented by battery. You can see all these bars are representing the energy density of each of these potential sources of energy for the transport sectors. So what is now the challenge is to try to in some way decarbonize, if possible, the fuels which have the highest energy density. And in this case, we can always see in this slide that the most dense energy is present in the fuels which are in the liquid state. So the challenge is to try to decarbonize these fuels because, of course, energy density is a fundamental advantage. Everybody knows that we can obtain a full energy, say, a full energy availability in a car today with the fuel, a conventional fuel, which allow us to go from Rome to Milan with just using 3 or 4 or 5 minutes only for filling the tank, while it's completely different in this moment with batteries. So the challenge is in this moment is this one. And in this graph, you can see that there are various alternatives. And if we consider the well-to-wheel reduction of CO2, which is, in our opinion, the real item that we have to consider, the well-to-wheel reduction in these graphs is very high, but can be very high in some cases, but the implementation challenge associated is very high also. So the graphs just is giving to you an idea on where in this moment are distributed the various potential alternatives for decarbonizing the sector, with a challenge from a technology point of view, which is increasing in some areas like marine and heavy trucks. Today we have already several possibilities. Some of them are already available, others are under study. Talking about the low carbon liquid fuels, for instance, we have already biodistillates and ethanol, which are commercially available at scale. So they are already in use and they can be continued to use, especially in the transition. Hydrogen also offers a good opportunity, a good potential, can be also sourced from fossil fuels using carbon capture storage or even renewable energy. So we could use both the so-called blue and green hydrogen. In this area, the infrastructure are still to be developed, so this is the challenge. But the investments could be located also on this area, so implementing the infrastructures. We have more advanced potential fuels, which are for instance, the so-called e-fuels or synthetic fuels, which are liquid fuels which can be produced synthetically, combining back hydrogen with CO2, of course, using energy. And the energy, of course, should be from a renewable source or from a source equipped with carbon capture storage. They, at this moment, are quite costly. Also, the advanced biofuels are under study. Advanced biofuels can be produced from waste material, for instance, so also helping the cycle of the recycling of raw materials. And both these alternatives, which are very promising at this moment, are still quite high cost, and they don't have a scale enough developed to be applied. And so they require a very clear regulatory framework to be eventually incentivized and developed. So I would, at this point, leave time for questions, if any.
Thank you.
And stop share.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Marco Falcone, for your presentation. I don't see any question from the audience, but I have a question for you, very quick question, because we have 5 minutes more. What do you think about in the marine transportation? The technology is more attractive in the next future. I mean, in the next 10 years, because that is a very, as you showed before, a very important problem in order to afford. So, what do you think about that?
Well, there are various alternatives already, as all the other sectors, and some of them still to be, as I said before, better developed also from a technological point of view. One of them is biofuels. Biofuels in marine could be a very good option because they have the peculiarity of being liquid and so easy transportable, and they don't take a lot of space, of course. So because they have this very high density. Biofuels could be also advanced because but we have then to develop some additional technologies to decrease costs. Advanced means that they should come from, of course, wastes, for instance. Another possibility is to use gas, could be GNL, maybe also with the scrubber. GNL, which could be also partially or completely from biological origin, so biomethane, for instance. We could use nitrogen. Even in this case, we need energy to separate the hydrogen in the molecule of nitrogen. So there are various alternatives. The less the less feasible at this point seems to be the electrical one, due to the enormous amount of batteries that we should have on board. So probably in the marine area, the low carbon liquid fuel are, in my opinion, are the most promising. Promising one.
Yes, I agree, because the engines are ready in order to accept this kind of new generation of fuels. And so they could be very, very promising answer in few times. So could be very nice. Thank you very much again. Yes, we exceed a few minutes of our timing, but I think it was a very, very interesting session, because the topic of energy security developed from different perspectives, completed in a certain way all the feature of the problem. So I thank you very much again, Silvia Pariente-David, Alicia Mignone, and Marco Falcone, for your very nice, interesting speech. And I give the floor to the organization in order to move on in the further development of our conference. Thank you very much again.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. See you soon.
See you.